Okay, so our last talk in the session will be by Giacomo Rosa and Lipovetzky. The paper is based novelty exploration.
Hello, I'm Giacomo. I will be presenting work from ECAI last year with Nir, who's my supervisor. The session is classical planning, so this is just a reminder of classical planning. We're looking for a plan, which is a sequence of actions that maps initial state to the goal. Perhaps the most common way of solving these problems is through planning as heuristic search. We use heuristics that estimate the cost or the distance, if it's unit cost of actions, from a state to the goal. And in the past 10, 15 years, an alternative and a very, well, not necessarily alternative, but another approach that can be used together, it's been very effective, is that of novelty. Whereas heuristics tend to be exploitation of information, we can think of novelty as a more exploratory technique, because sometimes heuristics can be uninformed. For example, in this case, intuitively you could hit a wall, whereas novelty allows us to seek states which have novel information, so information that has not been seen before, and this can help us find alternative trajectories towards the goal, alternative paths. And to go more in detail, we have the state is considered novel if it contains a set of facts that has never been observed before. Normally, for computational reasons, we bound the maximum size of these set of facts. So here we can see the examples. If we only look at sets of facts of size 1, we have that breadth first search, and the visitation is from left to right. The first state is novel, second state is novel. The third one in this case is not, because we have seen A and we've seen fact B already. Here the letters are the facts. Then BC is novel because we haven't seen C. If we look at sets of size 2 in this case, then AB is novel because it's the first time we see facts A and B together. And BC is novel, but then we have already seen C, and so we prune it in this case. We don't necessarily have to prune non-novel states. We can also rank them, and we rank them according to the size of the smallest set of facts that has never been observed before. Another addition to the technique is that of partition novelty. So rather than comparing a set of facts to the entire history of states visited before, we make use of some partition functions, which could be just heuristic functions, and we only compare to the history of states that have the same value for that partition function. So for example, if we use hadd and a state has a value of 3, then we only compare to the history of other states or other nodes that have had a hadd value of 3. And I'll also briefly introduce the best first with search algorithm, solver. Here we use this partition novelty heuristic with maximum set size of 2, because anything above becomes too computationally complex to exactly measure without approximations of sort. And then we have 2 partition functions. One of is goal counting. The other one looks at facts achieved in relaxed plans and compares to facts achieved in search, but that's not too important for the purpose of this talk. And then it breaks ties with goal counting. And while it's a relatively simple solver, it actually is very powerful and almost as competitive of current state-of-the-art solvers. So the motivation for this research, titled Count-Based Novelty, is that rather than looking only at the first occurrence of a fact, so whether it's novel or not, we wanted to know if we could get anything out of looking at additional occurrences, so actually counting the occurrences of facts in history. And there's quite a history of using count-based exploration in other areas of AI as well, such as reinforcement learning. It's generally a bit different, so in that cases they often look such as upper confidence bounds with or upper multi-arm bandits, or also upper confidence trees. They generally look at counts to how many times you have observed the state to obtain better estimates of the value of a specific state, so an upper confidence, and you can kind of obtain a better estimate, basically. However, while what we're doing is different here, the point is that even very simple use of counts can be very powerful. And we also seek to address limitations of novelty, such as the fact that the time and memory usage is exponential in the maximum tuple size, the maximum set size, sorry. If I use tuple, I mean set. And we can, as I said, we often limit to sets of size 2, and we run out of novel sets. And that makes us lose informativeness because we cannot check for novel sets of size 3 and above. Whereas with counts, you never run out of counts. You can always just increase the count. The contributions of this work is count-based novelty, but there's also 2 other simple techniques, because it was a master project, so I just packaged everything together, so to speak. But the main contribution is count-based novelty. So binary novelty is what I explained earlier, which is the previous technique. And the main changes are, so rather than looking at facts that have never been observed before, we look at how many times has the fact been observed before. Rather than looking at sets of size 1 and 2, we only look at sets of size 1, so the occurrence of individual facts. And we rank the count-based novelty of the state depending not on the minimum size among novel sets, but the minimum current counts of individual facts in the state. So for looking at this example now, we have that the first 2 states, the count-based novelty is 0 because it's the first time we see A and B. Then for the third state, we have both seen A and B once already before, so the count-based novelty is 1. BC, we have C that we have never seen before, count-based novelty is 0, but then we see C again, so count-based novelty is 1, and D. And at the end of all of this, we have the table on the right, which represents the counts of these facts. So it's quite straightforward. And why does this end up working? Well, what is it doing in practice? So from our analysis, we find that the preferring states with a minimum, with lower occurrence count, minimum occurrence count, helps us, we derive some equations which help us show that intuitively a fact that hasn't occurred a lot will have lower co-occurrence with other facts. So in practice, we see this, and we actually derive formulas showing this, and we can see that we can estimate the number of novel sets of greater sizes using the counts of facts of individual states. So we can kind of connect this estimated measure to the actual novelty measure. However, the limitation here is also that these estimates are based on general assumptions, so to speak, and they may diverge from the actual structure of the problem. So there definitely are problems where the binary novelty that actually observes and looks for facts of, for sets of size 2 can actually observe them, whereas in certain cases, count-based novelty might misestimate them. However, count-based novelty does not run out of novel facts to look for, or of informativeness, because we don't run out of sets of size 1 or 2. So in a sense, they are complementary, and this is one of the main takeaways from count-based novelty. It's not necessarily better, but it's complementary, and this can help us. I will now briefly, before showing some of the results, I will introduce one of the other techniques I mentioned, because I guess the other main goal of this research was to improve the performance of best first with search planners. And it turns out that best first with search planners have very high memory usage, mainly because they tend to expand nodes much more quickly than many other planners that use highly informed but also a bit slow to compute relaxed plan heuristics, such as HFF. And count-based novelty does address this a little, because using only facts of size 1, we only have linear memory usage, plus the number of partitions in partition novelty. But we also find that this is still, it still hits a bit of a limit and fails a lot because of hitting the maximum 8 GB memory limit, which is commonplace for IPC experiments. It's the limit which is set for IPC track, satisficing track. So the trimmed open list, all it does is that it limits the maximum size of the open list, and it does so in a very simple but effective way. So you fill the list, and once it's full, you fundamentally just sample a random leaf, you compare the node with that leaf, and if it's better, you swap it. If it's not better, you don't swap it, and whatever node is outside, you just delete it. It's relatively simple. I have not noticed its usage anywhere else, but it turns out to be very effective. So this is the first set of results, and we can see, firstly, the T subscript represents the use of trimmed open lists, so that alone can be very helpful in improving coverage due to, as I said, helping with the memory usage of the planner. But then we also have that, so BFCS is the same exact solver that I introduced earlier, BFWS, except we substitute the binary novelty with sets of facts of size 1 and 2 with the count-based novelty over individual facts that I introduced earlier. And BFNOS is fundamentally the two solvers zipped together. We have two open lists. One is BFWS, the other is BFCS. We alternate expansions between the two. And the main takeaway here is that, indeed, we can observe the complementarity between the two techniques, which helps us further achieve a bit higher coverage. Lastly, I will talk about the last memory-related technique, which further helps us improve the performance of best first with search planners, which is very simple in itself. The use of memory thresholds to fall back from the front end to the back end. I guess the contribution here is more noticing the potential use case, which perhaps has flown a bit under the radar because, again, many other planners seem to be much more time-bounded than memory-bounded in terms of their performance. We can see in the left graph that even using the trimmed open list, the number of failures, the majority of failures happen due to hitting maximum 8 GB memory limit. And interestingly, many of these failures actually happen very early on in a search, relatively speaking. So if we could just fail from the search early and then have a second solver try to tempt that problem rather than just failing outright, we would be able to, again, go on to the second solver quite early in the search and fundamentally help the overall plan time rather compared to a one-size-fits-all time limit, time threshold for going from the first to the last, to the second solver. And on the right, we have the memory over coverage graph. And what this tells us, the shape of it tells us, is that as the memory increases, the probability to solve yet unsolved problems, instances, greatly diminishes. So if we fall back, chances are we would have failed that instance anyways. And we can see in pairing, we use both memory and time thresholds, therefore. And we pair our front-end solver with other top-performing solvers as backends, and we can see the red line is the base solver. And as I mentioned earlier, the main takeaway here is that we can fail over at different times, and this can help us achieve quite a higher coverage already starting from the 400-second mark. And yeah, ultimately, it's a strategy to further improve the coverage of solvers, and even just using memory thresholds alone can ultimately still help us improve coverage quite a bit. Thank you for being here. I believe you're now free to go to the social drinking. And
to the social drinks. We have some time for questions.
Sorry, I have a question. So why alternating those two?
Sorry, can you use the microphone because it's recording?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, then it's like when you're alternating these two, performs the best.
When alternating these two performs better. Yeah. Because we have two solvers that fundamentally seek different states in their exploratory process. The binary novelty, I said, it will get signals from, let's start from the count-based novelty. It will look for states which, according to our analysis, are believed to have higher number of novel sets of facts of greater size, but this is based to a generic estimate, basically. Like there's a discrepancy between our estimate of how many novel fact sets of a given size occur in a state and how they actually occur due to the structure of the domain. Whereas with the binary novelty, we actually observe sets of size 2. So ultimately, they perform differently in specific problems. Some perform better in some problems. Count-based novelty performs better in other problems. Mainly, it does perform better in many problems where we hit one of the limitations of binary novelty I mentioned earlier, which is that it fundamentally just runs out of novel sets of size 1 and 2, whereas count-based novelty keeps having some sort of informativeness in the search. And ultimately, putting them together, alternating, seems to benefit from the strengths of both. If you want to know exactly why that is the case, I know that there's work on heuristics, alternating open lists for heuristics, and they are quite helpful, in many cases more helpful than having the heuristics break ties sequentially in the same open list. And while with novelty metrics, unlike heuristics, they're not independent of one another, as they both depend on the history of state visitation, which is affected by both. It seems to help them in a similar way.
Thank you. Any other questions?
One part I didn't understand, when you said that you trim the open list, does that mean that the planner becomes incomplete?
Yes,
okay.
That's a good question. It does become incomplete. However, since then, I actually have implemented a variant of it, which can be complete. All you have to do is add a little bit simple, you add an additional, you keep track of the nodes which have had at least one child node that was pruned. And you can also keep track of the ones that were not pruned. So then when you finish all the nodes in the open list, you just go back to one of those parent nodes and you only expand and I've actually stress tested that variant by having a really small open list of 8 nodes, and it performs a sort of beam search of sorts, which it doesn't perform better.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because there is memory bounded A star, right? And that sort of guarantees completeness, but again, memory. And so I was hoping if you tried something and if there is a time, you're doing a time memory trade-off there, right? And so how bad is the time, if you have any intuition over that? Would it be possible for us to have that kind of algorithm and still performing as well as the trimming?
You mean adding the completeness part to the trimmed open list?
Yes. So essentially,
I think the overhead is I haven't really, because it was a bit of a quick implementation just to see if you, but I don't think the overhead is much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more? Okay. I have one more short one, or maybe a comment. I was wondering, you could also treat this as a randomized selection rather than picking nodes to explore with a certain novelty and excluding the others. You could say randomly selecting a node to explore, like in epsilon, what is it called, the type-based search. and weight that with the counts. Have you tried anything like that?
I am not, sorry, I don't fully understand what you mean with the sampling.
Okay, so
Sorry, with the randomized part?
yeah, the randomness part. So instead of excluding all the nodes with where the novelty is too low, you could consider them, but with a lower priority, like with a lower probability than the nodes with a high novelty. Like essentially, say the higher the novelty of a node, the more likely it is to be expanded.
The higher the novelty. We rank them. We don't prune or exclude anything. Perhaps
Okay, so
we rank the nodes.
yeah,
with
but that means you would expand a node with a high novelty before you ever expand a node with a low
Yes.
novelty, right? Okay, so yeah, what I think about would be, like at any point you'd have a chance to expand any node. Just the low novelty nodes would be
Low
much
probability of
less
doing so.
probable.
Yeah, I haven't thought of that. Yeah, it could be something to try.
So you think that just adds a bit more like randomness to the whole process? Whether that's good or not, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be more exploratory.
maybe
More
worth it.
exploratory. Yeah, good idea.
Any further questions? No? Then thank you again.